Is South Africa headed towards a failed state scenario? This is a question that we at the Centre for Risk Analysis often get from our clients. And to help us answer this question, we're joined today by Claude Baissac, who is the chief consultant at Eunomix, a consultancy that deals with political risk, policy, and specifically issues around mineral resources. Claude, welcome to the Centre for Risk Analysis channel.
Hi, David. Good to be here.
So, Claude, you've written a very interesting paper for the Daily Maverick, where you outline key drivers of state performance across various developing countries. And you also look very specifically at South Africa's development trajectory. And you warn that unless the strategic direction and the policy framework of the country is changed, South Africa could be heading towards a failed state scenario by 2030. Could you explain how you arrived at this conclusion and also help us to understand the methodology behind your diagnostic framework?
Yeah, well, let me start by saying that, it started with a frustration with the microeconomic analysis framework, which, every year you read the Reserve Bank and the standard economic theory forecast for the next 2 years, and they always tell you that, in 2 years' time, South Africa's growth is going to increase by X%, right? And so, for the past 10 years, we've been reading that, things will get better next year and the year after, but it doesn't. And so the Reserve Bank forecast always rebased, right, the bottom of the curve and the lifting up. And it pointed out to me that there was something fundamentally wrong with that methodology, and that the likelihood of the failure of that methodology is based on the fact that South Africa probably does not correspond to the kind of emerging market and advanced economies where this kind of, business cycle-based economic system would revert. But what we're seeing instead is a continuous decline in growth year on year and a continuous worsening of economic and social indicators. So I started a quest for a better methodology. And as a political scientist, I thought, let me go back to state theory and let me see what these guys do that could be very useful. And I discovered, a number of very interesting data sets. And I started playing with those data sets. And then I started seeing that there were tremendous convergence and coherence between these different data sets. So we put in place a system where we effectively measure state performance on an international basis. And then we go back in time, so it's past 15 years, it's now, and then we use that to forecast the trajectory of states. And it's not just developing countries, it's all the countries in the world. And for a number of clients of ours, who started asking us the same question your clients asked you, is, where is South Africa going? We said, well, we're going to use data. We're not going to use opinion. We're not going to use kind of subjective, traditional economic forecasting stuff, because it's clearly not working. And and we presented to a lot of our clients, and the reaction was always interesting, that no, you're wrong. Things will get better. And then you tell the clients, well, on what basis? And so it really becomes a very interesting process for understanding the drivers for performance, measuring performance, using it to forecast the future as a kind of base case, and then finding the critical drivers that seem to be explaining that, and then engaging in scenario analysis, scenario planning with clients to try to understand what it means for their business. And we applied this to South Africa, and the result is that, our forecast is that if South Africa doesn't change trajectory, by 2030, it will be, in the failed state type of country.
So, Claude, I would certainly agree with your analysis there in terms of the methodology. I think it's very important not to be wedded to one particular idea of the future and to use a very data-centric approach. So let's look a little bit more closely at South Africa. Why has South Africa embarked on this trajectory? What policy missteps are leading to the governance failures that we've seen and also the low growth outlook for the country? What are some of, in terms of the diagnosis, what are some of the key drivers there for you in terms of South Africa?
So I think at the meta, if you want, at the meta strategy level, the kind of theorem, right, or fundamental theory that has inspired the ENC. The fascinating stuff when you look at the data is you realize that in fact they replicated to a large extent the kind of resource-centric, capital-intensive industrialization strategy that the apartheid regime had put in place. And so what you have had is you had effectively a kind of jobless growth, mainly jobless growth in the 2000s, like 2000, and mainly driven by the commodity boom, and a refusal for a number of reasons which we can explore to embark on export-oriented, labor-intensive development strategy. The result of which is that less than 15% of South Africa's living population is currently employed. Of that, 5 million are paying taxes. Now, how do you sustain a country on that basis?
So, Claude, in terms of the solutions to this problem, what policy interventions would you recommend so that we can avert this failed state scenario that you warn about?
So, I just put the finger on the key problem, right? It's the divorce between the politics and the economy. The fact that you have two centers of power, right? And as a result of that, you don't have pro-growth policies, employment policies. What you have is you have pro-welfare state, pro-government expenditure, pro-white elephants, pro-patronage, pro-corruption policies around state. This is devilish, and this is really the fragile state, failed state trap, right? So the only way to escape that trap is to, it's pointless for businesses and the private sector to advocate, policies that fundamentally go against the political interests of the end. It's just idiotic. Sorry to use the word, but it's going to a guy saying, hey, do this because it's good for the economy. And the guys are like, yeah, we'll do it because it sounds good. But we'll never flipping implement that, right? And which is effectively what we have. So everybody has to give. Look, in the long term, failed state means the NC loses power unless they start to suppress, democracy, as we've seen in many similar countries. And they lose power to more populist, more radical EFF type political parties, which bring economic ruin immediately. So my sense is that everybody needs to kind of get together, read the tea leaves and realize that, everybody has to compromise and that we cannot create economic growth out of nothing, right? The consumption lever is exhausted. The government expenditure lever is reaching exhaustion. And really the fundamentals of our economic activities, whether it's agriculture, manufacturing, industry, construction, mining, are all, pretty exhausted. So how do we reform the economy immediately without endangering, if you want, the vested interest, which will fight against this kind of economic reform? And that the idea is to adopt the dual track approach, right? Where you do two different things at once. You keep the economic structure and the political economic structure as it is for now, because too many vested interests depend on it to allow reform to take place. But in parallel, you say, yes, we're going to keep this going. We're going to keep, a fairly expensive public sector. We're going to have absolutely keep the welfare state going. Otherwise, we're going to have social explosion and political explosion. But we're going to have to cut, say, needless investment in infrastructure projects that, don't bring return and are very costly. And instead, we're going to agree on that basis to create an export processing zone type, special economic zone type sector that is really internationally competitive and that is really focused on the areas, both sectoral and geography, where we have latent competitiveness or we have comparative advantage. And And it's a bit of a messy compromise, but it's the only, in my view, based on the data, based on the comparative analysis, based on what's happening, the only way that we avert the worst possible scenario.
Well, Claude, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. And I think the difficult choices that are going to need to be made around economic policy are going to involve some very hard trade-offs from those vested interests that you spoke of. So thanks very much for joining us on the CRA channel.
Thank you. It was good to be here.
That's it from me, David Ansara at the Center for Risk Analysis. Please do remember to like and share this video, subscribe to the channel as well, and we will put a link to the report on the Eunomix website in the description below. There's also a link where you can become a free 30-day trial member of the CRA. So do follow that, give us your details, and we'll be happy to share our insights and analysis and briefings with you. Until next time, take care.